The engine exploded at 35,000 feet. 222 lives. No solution. The pilots were lost. Then a woman stood up from row 8. Walked straight to the cockpit. Nobody knew her name. Nobody knew her secret. Call sign Phoenix was back. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was April 3, 2017. A Monday morning. The kind of morning that feels completely ordinary. The sun was rising over Los Angeles. Coffee shops were busy. Traffic was building on the freeways. At LAX, Delta Flight 1549 was being prepared for its transcontinental route to New York JFK. The Boeing 777-200ER sat gleaming on the tarmac, fully fueled, boarding in progress. 222 passengers filed through the jetway, dragging carry-on bags, checking phones, finding their seats. Gate agents smiled. Flight attendants welcomed. Nobody was worried. Nobody had any reason to be. The weather was perfect. The skies were clear. It was going to be a routine 6-hour flight across America. Nobody expected what was about to happen. In row 8, seat 8A, a woman settled into her window seat and pulled out a book. She was in her early 40s. Athletic, with the quiet, coiled kind of fitness that comes not from a gym but from years of physical discipline. She was about 5 feet 9 inches tall. Her shoulder-length blonde hair had natural gray streaks running through it, which she had never bothered to cover. She wore no makeup. Her clothes were simple, dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket that she draped across her lap like a blanket. She had a small backpack under the seat in front of her and nothing in the overhead bin. She traveled light. She always had. The book she opened was Unbroken, by Laura Hillenbrand, the story of Louis Zamperini, a World War II bombardier who survived a plane crash over the Pacific, drifted for 47 days on a raft, and then endured years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. It was the kind of book she liked. Stories about people who refused to quit. People who found something inside themselves when everything outside had failed. In the seat next to her, 8B, a teenager sat with earbuds in, already deep into a movie on his iPad. In 8C, a businessman in a crisp blue shirt was typing furiously on his laptop, his tie loosened, his coffee balanced on the tray table. Neither of them looked at the woman in 8A. She gave them no reason to. She was invisible. Quiet. Unremarkable. That was exactly how she liked it. Her name was Rebecca Chase. She was 43 years old. She lived in Santa Monica, California, in a modest house 2 blocks from the ocean. She ran a small aviation consulting firm. She advised aircraft manufacturers on safety systems and helped design pilot training programs. She traveled constantly for work, which was why she was on this flight. A meeting in New York. 2 days, then back home. Routine. Her LinkedIn profile described her as an experienced aviation safety professional with over 20 years in the industry. That was accurate. It was also incomplete. Because 20 years ago, Rebecca Chase was not an aviation consultant. 20 years ago, she was Lieutenant Rebecca Chase of the United States Air Force. She flew F-15E Strike Eagles, twin-engine, all-weather, long-range strike fighters. The most capable and demanding aircraft in the Air Force inventory at the time. She flew them in combat. 3 deployments. Iraq. Afghanistan. The Balkans. She flew 214 combat missions over the course of 12 years of active duty service. She earned commendations, medals, and the deep respect of every pilot and officer who ever flew alongside her or commanded her. But what she was most known for, at least within the walls of the Air Force, was her call sign. Phoenix. She earned that name during Operation Allied Force in 1999, the NATO air campaign over the former Yugoslavia, specifically over Kosovo. She was 28 years old, already a veteran of 2 combat deployments, already one of the most trusted pilots in her squadron. On a clear spring evening over Kosovo, her F-15E took catastrophic battle damage from Serbian air defense systems. The hydraulic system was compromised. One engine was completely destroyed. Her flight controls were barely responding. The aircraft was dying around her while she was still inside it. Her wingman radioed her to eject. The aircraft was not flyable. That was the rational assessment. She disagreed. She nursed that destroyed, crippled, burning aircraft for 120 miles through hostile airspace. She managed the failing flight controls with a combination of engine thrust differential and raw skill. She crossed into friendly airspace over the Adriatic Sea. She made radio contact with Aviano Air Base in northern Italy. She requested an emergency landing, talked through her damage with the tower, and then brought her F-15E down on the runway with the aircraft literally on fire. Crash and rescue crews were running toward her jet before she even stopped rolling. They had foam trucks alongside her within seconds. The aircraft was a total loss. Mechanics and investigators later said it should never have made it back. The structural damage alone should have caused it to break apart in flight. The engine damage meant she was operating on one engine the entire way home, at reduced power, with asymmetric thrust and barely functional controls. They told her she should have ejected over Kosovo. She probably would have been captured. She told them she didn't feel like getting captured that day. The call sign was obvious. Rising from the ashes. Coming home when no one believed it was possible. Phoenix. She went on to log 2,847 total flight hours over her Air Force career. 647 of those were combat hours. She became one of the most respected F-15 pilots of her generation. Officers who outranked her by decades asked for her opinion on tactical problems. Younger pilots sought her out in the squadron ready room, hoping some of whatever she had would rub off. Then, 15 years before she sat down in seat 8A with her Laura Hillenbrand book, she left the Air Force. Not because she wanted to leave. Not because her career was over. Not because she had run out of missions or skills or ambition. Because her husband died. His name was David Chase. He was also an Air Force pilot. He flew F-16s. He was 31 years old. He was killed during a training exercise, his engine failed during a low-altitude maneuver, and his ejection system malfunctioned. He never got out of the aircraft. Rebecca was at Aviano when it happened. She got the phone call at 0300 in the morning, local time. She sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark for a long time before she could make herself stand up. She had a 3-year-old daughter at home in Virginia. Her name was Emma. Rebecca flew home on emergency leave and did not go back. She resigned her commission, turned in her flight gear, and became a civilian. She was 28 years old, the same age she had been when she earned the name Phoenix over Kosovo. She packed up the house in Virginia, drove to California, and started over. She opened her consulting firm. She raised her daughter. She kept in touch with a handful of old Air Force friends, but she never talked about her career to anyone outside that small circle. She never mentioned combat. Never mentioned Kosovo. Never mentioned Phoenix. Just Rebecca Chase. Aviation consultant. Single mom. That was the whole story, as far as the world knew. But some things never leave a person. Not completely. Every time Rebecca flew commercially, which was constantly, because her work required it, she listened. Old habit. Old training. She listened to the engines the way a musician listens to an orchestra, tracking each instrument, sensing when something is even slightly off. She felt the aircraft through her seat, through her feet on the floor, through subtle changes in vibration that most passengers never noticed. She watched the wing through her window. She tracked the sound of the landing gear, the flaps, the thrust changes during climb and descent. She was not paranoid about it. She was not anxious. It was simply how she was wired. 12 years of combat flying had turned her into a sensor. She could no more turn it off than she could turn off breathing. On the morning of April 3, 2017, somewhere over Colorado at 35,000 feet, she was reading about Louis Zamperini when the right engine changed. It was subtle. A slight increase in vibration. A small shift in the pitch of the sound. Most people would not have noticed it. The businessman in 8C was still typing. The teenager in 8B was still watching his movie. The flight attendants were in the galley, preparing the beverage service. Rebecca noticed. She lowered her book and looked out the window. She watched the engine nacelle on the right wing. The vibration increased slightly. She felt it now through the armrest. She kept watching, very still, the way she used to go still in the cockpit when something was wrong and she was gathering information before acting. Probably nothing. Minor thrust variation. Could be 100 benign things. But the vibration kept increasing. That was not normal. Then it happened. The right engine exploded. It was not a movie explosion, not a ball of orange fire with dramatic music. It was something far more violent and industrial. An uncontained engine failure. The turbine blades inside the engine, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, broke apart under stress. The fragmenting blades, pieces of hardened metal moving at extraordinary speed, tore through the engine housing, punched through the cowling, and flew outward like shrapnel from a grenade. The sound was a single massive concussive boom that hit every person on the aircraft like a physical blow. The plane lurched hard to the right. Unsecured items flew from tray tables. The beverage cart in the galley toppled. Every oxygen mask in the cabin dropped from the overhead panels simultaneously, and for a half second before the screaming started, there was silence, the silence of 222 people processing something that had never happened to them before. Then the screaming started. Rebecca was already moving before conscious thought caught up with her actions. She pressed her face to the window and looked at the right engine. The cowling was peeled back like a tin can. There was fire coming from the engine. There was black smoke beginning to trail behind the aircraft. She could see metal debris on the surface of the wing, shrapnel that had not made it past the engine and had instead embedded in the wing structure itself. She looked more carefully at the wing surface. And her blood went cold. A fuel leak. A puncture in the upper surface of the right wing, maybe 3 feet forward of the engine position. Jet fuel, Jet A, clear and volatile, was streaming out of the puncture and being caught by the 500-mile-an-hour airflow, vaporizing into a fine mist. And the engine, the burning engine, still smoldering despite the fact that the fuel supply to it had been cut, was sitting directly adjacent to that fuel vapor. 15 feet away. Maybe less. Rebecca had enough experience with aircraft fuel systems and fire behavior to calculate the situation in seconds. The engine fire would reach the fuel vapor. Maybe not immediately. But the heat alone would do it. The hot metal surfaces around the damaged engine were more than hot enough to ignite fuel vapor. When that happened, they would not have a wing fire. They would have a fuel tank fire. And the right-wing fuel tank on a 777-200ER held approximately 18,000 pounds of jet fuel. If the wing tank exploded at altitude, the aircraft would break apart. All 222 people aboard would die. They had maybe 3 minutes. Possibly less. The PA system crackled. Captain Michael Rodriguez's voice filled the cabin, steady, professional, running the script that every airline captain is trained to run in exactly this situation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We have experienced an engine failure. Please remain calm. We are declaring an emergency and diverting to Denver. Flight attendants, please be seated immediately. Rebecca unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. The flight attendant nearest to her, a young woman named Ashley, mid-20s, whose face had gone pale but who was moving with professional purpose, turned toward her immediately. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. Please put on your oxygen mask and remain seated. Rebecca looked at her directly. Her voice was calm. Not loud. Not panicked. Controlled in a way that was almost alarming in the middle of the chaos around them. Listen to me carefully. I'm a retired Air Force pilot. I flew F-15 Strike Eagles for 12 years. I can see the engine from my window. There is a fuel leak on the right wing, and the engine is still burning. If that fuel vapor ignites, this aircraft will explode in the air. I need to talk to the pilots right now. Every second matters. Do you understand me? Ashley looked at her. She had been trained to handle panicking passengers, aggressive passengers, intoxicated passengers, medical emergencies. She had not been trained for this. But something in Rebecca's voice, the absolute flatness of it, the absence of hysteria, the weight of knowledge behind the words, made the decision for her. Follow me, Ashley said. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Rodriguez was 52 years old with 21,000 flight hours. He was good at his job. He was calm, experienced, and methodical. He was running through the engine failure checklist with the practiced efficiency of a man who had trained for this hundreds of times. Beside him, First Officer Sarah Lynn, 38 years old, 9,200 hours, was on the radio with Denver Center, declaring the emergency, getting the diversion to Denver set up. Emergency services were being notified. It was going exactly the way it was supposed to go. A 777 can fly perfectly well on one engine. It is designed to do exactly that. The loss of one engine is serious but manageable. Divert to the nearest suitable airport, run the checklists, land. It happens. It's handled. This was not going to be Flight 1549 over the Hudson. They had altitude, they had power, they had runway options. Ashley opened the cockpit door. Captain, there's a passenger who says she's a retired Air Force pilot. She says she can see a fuel leak on the wing. Rebecca stepped through the door before Rodriguez could respond. Captain, my name is Rebecca Chase. I flew F-15E Strike Eagles for 12 years. I'm in 8A, window seat, right side. I can see the right wing from my seat. You have shrapnel damage to the fuel tank. Fuel is vaporizing from a puncture on the upper wing surface directly in front of the engine position. The engine is still burning. You have between 2 and 3 minutes before the fuel vapor ignites and you have an uncontrollable wing fire. I need to help you right now. Rodriguez turned in his seat and looked at her. He saw a woman in dark jeans and a leather jacket. Not what he expected when someone said fighter pilot. But he had flown with military pilots. He had worked with them throughout his career. He recognized something in this woman, the stillness, the directness, the absence of the social performance that civilians instinctively engaged in when they wanted to be believed. She wasn't asking him to believe her. She was telling him facts. Show me, he said. Rebecca leaned over his right shoulder and pointed through the cockpit window to the right wing. Rodriguez and Lynn both shifted their angle of view and looked. They saw it. The fuel vapor streaming from the puncture was visible as a faint shimmer in the airflow, nearly invisible, but there if you knew what you were looking for. The disabled engine was smoking. Lynn's voice was tight. Why didn't our fuel quantity gauges catch this? It's a slow leak, Rebecca said. Pressure drop hasn't hit the warning threshold yet. But the vapor is real and the engine is still hot. You don't have time to wait for a warning light. Rodriguez, fire suppression should have killed the engine fire. It suppressed it. It didn't kill it. Look at the engine, there are still hot spots. And the airflow over that structure is generating friction heat. One spark is all it needs. As if the aircraft had been listening, it happened. The fuel vapor ignited. A massive plume of orange and white fire erupted from the right wing. Not a flicker. Not a small flame. A full wing fire, feeding on the vaporized Jet A fuel streaming from the tank puncture, growing rapidly as the fuel flow fed it. The cockpit instruments immediately lit up with new alarms. From the cabin behind them, they heard screaming escalate to a new level of terror. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. What do we do? Rebecca's mind was already running the problem. She had dealt with aircraft fires before, not on a commercial jet, but the physics were the physics. Fire needs three things: fuel, oxygen, and heat. You eliminate any one of them and the fire dies. They couldn't stop the fuel, the tank was breached and the fuel was coming out. They had already activated the dump system, which would help, but not fast enough. They couldn't eliminate the heat, the engine structure was already at ignition temperature. But they could attack the oxygen. Dump fuel first, she said. Get as much out of that wing tank as fast as you can. But dumping alone won't be enough. You need to use airspeed to deprive the fire of oxygen. Descend. Push the aircraft to maximum operating speed. The airflow will blow the fire out, same principle as blowing out a candle. The faster you go, the more you choke the fire. Rodriguez looked at Lynn. Lynn looked at the fire on the wing. She nodded. Rodriguez activated the fuel dump system. Jet A fuel began streaming from the dump ports in the wings, and simultaneously pushed the nose of the 777 forward into a steep descent. The airspeed began climbing past 250 knots. The aircraft was already well below its cruising altitude and still descending rapidly. The passengers in the cabin were thrown back in their seats by the G-force. More screaming. More panic. The businessman in 8C had completely given up on his laptop. Rebecca watched the wing. The fire was still burning. But it was changing shape. Flattening. Stretching backward along the wing as the increased airflow started to dominate it. More, Rebecca said. Push it to VMO, maximum operating speed. 340 knots. That's outside normal parameters for this situation. Do you want to save this aircraft? Rodriguez pushed the throttle further. The airspeed needle climbed. 290, 310. 325, 340 knots. And the fire diminished. It did not go out completely, but it pulled back dramatically. The plume shrank. The spreading stopped. The fire was still burning at the engine nacelle itself, but it was no longer growing along the wing toward the center fuel tank. It's working. Lynn's voice was 3 notes higher than normal, but she was holding together. Fire is contained. Not out, but contained. Good, Rebecca said. Now we need to land this thing before the wing structure fails from heat damage. The metal around that fire has been at high temperature for, she checked her watch, about 90 seconds. Aluminum loses structural integrity fast under heat. We cannot give this more time. Denver is 8 minutes out, Lynn said. We don't have 8 minutes. What else is in range? Lynn worked the NAV display quickly, searching for airports within reach. Pueblo Memorial Airport. 60 miles southeast. Runway August 26, 10,500 feet. Paved. Long enough. Call it in, Rebecca said. That's where we land. Rodriguez keyed the radio. Denver Center, Delta 1549, we have uncontained engine failure with wing fire, emergency descent, requesting immediate clearance direct Pueblo Memorial, emergency services on standby. Delta 1549, Roger, cleared direct Pueblo Memorial. Descend pilot's discretion. All emergency services are being notified. You are number 1 priority. How many souls on board? 222 souls, 8 crew. Copy, 222 and 8. Pueblo is standing by for you. Rebecca moved to the jump seat behind the captain and strapped herself in. She had no authority here. This was Captain Rodriguez's aircraft and his decision on every question. But she had knowledge he needed, and he was smart enough to know it. She watched the wing through the cockpit side window. The fire was still burning at the engine nacelle, a persistent flame that the airspeed was suppressing but not extinguishing. The wing surface around the engine was visibly discolored, the aluminum alloy was changing color from the heat, the silver surface going to gold and then toward darker shades that told her the metal was being compromised. "How long since the fire started?" she asked. "About 4 minutes, Lynn said. "Wing structure has maybe 3 more minutes before you have to worry about integrity. We need to be on the ground in 5. Rodriguez, Pueblo is 40 miles. Push the descent. You need to be on the ground faster than standard approach." Rodriguez increased the descent rate. The 777 was coming down steeply now, far steeper than a normal approach. But they were not in a normal situation. Rebecca leaned forward and keyed the cabin PA handset. Her voice went out over the speakers, the same voice that had talked frightened young Air Force officers through combat emergencies over 3 war zones. Calm. Clear. No false comfort. No dramatization. Just information. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rebecca Chase. I am a former Air Force pilot currently assisting the flight crew. I want to tell you exactly what is happening, because you deserve to know. We have a wing fire. It is being controlled. We are landing at Pueblo, Colorado in approximately 4 minutes. When we land, we will need to evacuate this aircraft quickly, in under 90 seconds, because the wing has sustained heat damage. Your flight attendants are going to lead you. You will follow their instructions exactly. You will leave your bags. You will move immediately. You are going to be fine. Every single person on this aircraft is going to get off safely. But I need you to be ready to move the second those doors open. You can do this. 4 minutes." She hung up the handset. Rodriguez looked at her briefly. "You're calm. 12 years of combat missions," she said. "You learn that panic uses up time you don't have." The final approach to Pueblo Memorial Airport was unlike any approach Rebecca had experienced on a commercial aircraft. Rodriguez was flying manually, the autopilot had been disconnected because the aircraft was handling strangely, asymmetrically, the heat-damaged right wing generating slightly less lift than the left, creating a constant left-rolling tendency that required constant right aileron input to correct. Rebecca called out guidance steadily, pulling from her understanding of damaged aircraft aerodynamics, an understanding that came not from a textbook but from having flown damaged aircraft, from having brought broken jets home. "You're going to have asymmetric lift from the damaged wing. Small, constant aileron correction. Don't overcorrect, you'll get into a cycle. Light hands." Rodriguez nodded, adjusting. "Add 10 knots to your approach speed. The wing damage means your aerodynamic margins are reduced. You want that extra cushion. 150 plus 10, call it 160, Lynn confirmed, adjusting the target bug on the airspeed indicator. "When you touch down, reverse thrust on the left engine only. Do not activate reverse on the damaged side, you could reignite the fire. Brake hard and straight. Fire trucks will be alongside you." The radio confirmed it, Delta 1549, Pueblo Emergency Services are standing by on the runway. Fire, rescue, and medical are all positioned. Copy, Pueblo. We are 4 miles final. 777, emergency, 1 engine, wing fire. Rebecca looked out the window. The wing fire had diminished further during the high-speed descent but was still burning. The discoloration on the wing's surface had spread. She could see faint distortion in the metal near the engine, the aluminum was not failing, not yet, but it was getting close. They had maybe another 4 minutes before structural integrity became genuinely questionable. 1,000 feet. On glide slope. Lynn was running the callouts. The runway was visible ahead, a broad gray strip in the Colorado landscape, emergency vehicles lined up along both sides, lights flashing red and white. 500 feet. Stable. Rebecca watched the wing. Still burning. Still holding. 200 feet. Disconnect autothrottle, Rebecca said quietly. Manual all the way to touchdown. Rodriguez clicked off the autothrottle and took full manual control. His hands were steady. Whatever else he was feeling inside, his hands were steady. 100 feet. The runway was rushing up. 50 feet. Flare. Rodriguez pulled back gently on the controls, raising the nose slightly, slowing the descent rate. The main gear, 6 sets of wheels, 12 tires, came down and hit the runway hard. Not a smooth landing. A hard, definite, controlled contact. The aircraft bounced once, very slightly, then settled firmly on all wheels. Immediately, Rodriguez deployed the speed brakes and activated reverse thrust on the left engine only, exactly as Rebecca had told him. The aircraft decelerated rapidly. The brakes were applied hard. Fire trucks were already accelerating alongside the aircraft on both sides, crews ready to deploy foam the instant the plane stopped. The 777 slowed. And slowed. And came to a stop approximately 4,200 feet down the runway. Rebecca keyed the PA before the aircraft had fully settled. Evacuate. Now. Move, move, move. All 8 emergency exits opened simultaneously. 8 inflatable evacuation slides deployed in seconds. The flight attendants, 8 people who had been terrified for the past 8 minutes but had not faltered in their professionalism, positioned themselves at each exit and began directing passengers off the aircraft with the precise, repetitive urgency they had practiced hundreds of times. Leave your bags. Jump. Go. 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 The fire trucks reached the aircraft. Foam began coating the right wing, smothering the fire in a white chemical blanket. In the cabin, 222 passengers moved toward the exits. There was pushing. There was fear. There were people who froze for half a second in front of the slide before the flight attendant's insistent hands and voice moved them through. There was a woman near the back who grabbed for her bag and was firmly told to leave it. There was a man in first class who went the wrong way and was redirected. There were children being passed over seat backs by strangers, lifted and carried. By people they had never met and would never see again, united in the single shared purpose of getting off the aircraft. Rebecca was the last one out of the cockpit, following Rodriguez and Lynn. She moved through the emptying cabin, checking rows as she went, an old instinct, checking the aircraft, and went out the rear exit slide. She hit the tarmac, rolled, came up on her feet, and turned around. The 777 sat on the runway at Pueblo Memorial Airport with foam covering its right wing. The fire was out. Emergency crews were surrounding the aircraft. Sirens everywhere. Lights. The smell of jet fuel and fire suppressant and rubber. 73 seconds had elapsed between the opening of the first door and the last passenger leaving the aircraft. All 222 passengers. All 8 crew. 230 people total. Every single one of them was on the ground. Nobody died. Nobody had a life-threatening injury. Several passengers were treated for minor injuries, bumps and bruises from the evacuation, one woman who twisted her ankle on the slide. The most serious injury was a broken wrist. That was all. 2 hours later, Rebecca was sitting in a plastic chair in the Pueblo Memorial Airport terminal building. Someone had given her a blanket, which she was wearing around her shoulders without thinking about it. Someone else had given her coffee, which was terrible, and she was drinking it gratefully. FAA investigators were moving through the building, conducting initial interviews, separating passengers into groups. People were on their phones, calling families, calling news organizations. The terminal was chaos, controlled, managed chaos, but chaos nonetheless. She was sitting in a relatively quiet corner when Rodriguez found her. He had changed out of his uniform shirt, someone had given him a polo shirt from somewhere, and he looked exhausted in the way that people look after their nervous systems have been running at maximum intensity for an extended period and have finally been allowed to stop. He sat down in the chair beside her without being invited. They didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You saved 222 lives today." She shook her head. "You flew it. I just gave you some information. You gave me the right information at the right time. That's the whole game." She looked at her coffee. "How is Lynn?" "Shaken." "Fine. She's good." "She was steady the whole time." "She was." Rebecca nodded. "You both were." Another silence. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said. "That was your call sign. A long time ago. Why'd you leave?" "The Air Force." She was quiet for a moment. "My husband died. Training accident. I had a 3-year-old at home. I made a choice." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He didn't push further. He understood what that meant, in the way that military people and aviation people understand loss. "You still know how to fly," he said. "I haven't touched a flight control in 15 years. Doesn't matter. You still know." She looked out through the terminal windows at the aircraft sitting on the runway in the distance, surrounded by emergency vehicles, covered in foam, disabled and damaged but whole. Still together. Still in one piece. "Muscle memory," she said. "Some things you don't forget." He stood up and extended his hand. She stood and shook it. "Thank you, Phoenix," he said. She held his hand for a moment. "You brought everyone home, Captain. That was you." He gave her a small, tired smile. "We brought everyone home." The investigation took months. The NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, spent the better part of a year examining the wreckage of the right engine, analyzing the fuel system damage, reviewing the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, interviewing every member of the crew and dozens of passengers. The cause of the engine failure was eventually traced to a manufacturing defect in a turbine blade, metal fatigue in a component that had passed every inspection because the fatigue crack was in a location that standard inspection techniques did not reliably detect. It was the kind of failure that happened rarely but not impossibly, the kind of failure that aviation safety systems were continuously working to eliminate. The NTSB report, when it was published, noted that the crew had performed admirably under extreme conditions. It also noted that a passenger, identified in the report by the clinical designation, Subject A, former military aviator with type-specific expertise, had provided critical information to the flight crew during the emergency that had materially affected the outcome. The report did not use her name. It noted that her observation of the fuel leak had preceded the aircraft's own warning systems by approximately 4 minutes, and that the high-speed descent technique used to suppress the wing fire, while unconventional, had been effective and had bought the crew the time needed to reach a suitable airport. 4 minutes. The investigators noted that without that warning, the crew's first indication of the fuel leak would have been the ignition of the wing fire itself, at which point the time available to address the situation would have been substantially reduced. The outcome might well have been different. 3 weeks after the emergency, Rebecca was back in Santa Monica. Back in her office, answering emails, reviewing a safety report for a client in Seattle. Her consulting firm had received a flood of calls in the days after the emergency, other aviation companies, journalists, a production company that wanted to discuss a documentary. She had declined all media requests. She had replied to client calls and ignored the others. Delta sent her a formal letter thanking her for her actions. The letter was signed by the airline's CEO. It included an offer of complimentary lifetime travel on any Delta route, which she found both touching and somewhat unnecessary given that she spent roughly 80 days a year on airplanes already. She filed the letter in a folder in her desk drawer and went back to work. On a Tuesday evening, her phone rang. The screen showed a photo she loved, her daughter Emma, 18 years old now, gap-toothed smile, UCLA sweatshirt, standing on Venice Beach with her shoes off. She picked up. "Mom. Hey, baby. Mom, I saw the news. The full report thing. You saved a plane. I helped. That's all. You're being modest. They said there was a fuel leak and you saw it before the instruments did and you told them how to put the fire out with airspeed. That's not just helping, Mom. Rebecca smiled despite herself. I gave the captain some information. He did the hard part. You never told me, Emma said. The tone of her voice was not accusatory. It was something more complicated, a young person suddenly seeing a parent as a full, separate person for the first time, understanding that the woman who had driven her to school and made her dinner and helped her with college applications was also someone else entirely, had also been someone else entirely, before Emma was old enough to know. You never asked, Rebecca said. Were you good? As a fighter pilot, I mean. Were you good? Rebecca looked out her kitchen window at the orange light of the Pacific sunset coming in through the glass. She thought about all the years she had not talked about this. She thought about the box in her closet. Yeah, baby, she said quietly. I was good. They called you Phoenix. Why? Because I always came home. No matter how bad it got. I always found a way to get the aircraft back. Emma was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm proud of you, Mom. I've always been proud of you, but I mean, I didn't know about this part. And now I do. And I'm really, really proud of you. Rebecca felt her throat tighten in the way it only did when Emma said something that went straight through every layer of composure. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. Thanks, baby, she said. That means everything. That night, after Emma had hung up and the apartment was quiet and the sun was fully down, Rebecca went to her bedroom closet. It was a large walk-in closet, and at the back, behind the neat rows of business clothes she wore for client meetings, behind the shelf of running shoes and the stack of old ski equipment, there was a gray plastic storage box. It had not been opened in years. Maybe longer. She pulled it out and set it on the bed. She sat beside it for a moment without opening it. Then she lifted the lid. Inside, carefully folded, was her flight suit. The Nomex fabric was still intact, olive drab, stiff with age but perfectly preserved. The patches were still on the arms and chest. Her squadron patch, the 492nd Fighter Squadron, the Madhunters, from RAF Lakenheath and later from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. Her name tape, Chase. Her Air Force wings, the silver pilot's wings that she had pinned on at her graduation ceremony while David stood in the audience and beamed at her with a kind of pride that still, all these years later, she could see exactly if she closed her eyes. Underneath the flight suit was a small model aircraft, an F-15E Strike Eagle, about 12 inches long, in the paint scheme of the 391st Fighter Squadron. Her original squadron. The one she had flown with on her first deployment. Her fellow pilots had given it to her when she left the Air Force. They had all signed the base of it with a Sharpie marker. She lifted it and turned it over and read the signatures in the dim light. Names she still remembered. Some of them she was still in touch with. Some had gone on to fly for commercial airlines. Some had stayed in the Air Force and made rank she would have made if she had stayed. One had died, a training accident, 3 years after she had left the service. At the bottom of the box, beneath everything else, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, was a folded flag. The flag that had been draped over David's casket at Arlington National Cemetery. The flag that the officer had presented to her with Emma on her lap, Emma who was too young to understand what was happening and kept asking in a small, puzzled voice why Mommy was crying. She held the flag for a long time. She did not unwrap it. She just held it, feeling its weight, feeling the stiff, formal fabric. She thought about Phoenix. She thought about the burning F-15 over Kosovo. She thought about the 777 on fire over Colorado. She thought about Emma's voice on the phone, saying I'm proud of you, Mom. She thought about David. She put the flag back in the box, gently. She put the aircraft model back. She folded the flight suit on top of everything, careful with it, and replaced the lid. She slid the box back to its place in the closet. Some things stay put away. Some doors stay closed, not because you are ashamed of what is behind them, not because you have forgotten, but because what is behind them belongs to a different chapter, a different version of yourself, and opening them too wide lets that version out in ways that complicate the version you have become. The version who got up every morning for 15 years and made breakfast and drove carpools and sat through school plays and helped with homework and ran a company and paid the mortgage and raised a daughter alone, and did all of it without asking anyone to recognize what it cost. Phoenix was real. Phoenix had always been real. The skills, the instincts, the capability, none of that had gone anywhere. The proof of that was 222 people standing on a runway in Pueblo, Colorado, healthy and terrified and alive. But Rebecca Chase, aviation consultant, Santa Monica, California, single mother of one, she was real too. More real, in some ways, than Phoenix had ever been. Because Phoenix was who she was when everything was at its most extreme. Rebecca was who she was the rest of the time. Every ordinary day. Every quiet evening. Every phone call from Emma. Both were true. Both mattered. But when 222 people needed Phoenix, when the engine exploded and the wing caught fire and the clock started counting down, Phoenix answered. She answered without being asked, without needing recognition, without wanting credit. She answered because that was what Phoenix did. She always came home. No matter what.